And as I said earlier, this is, I think, a great presentation. You picked a good topic because it's a synthesis of all the best practices that I've accumulated over a lifetime of working. And of course, those are based on a lot of experience from others as well. So before I start, I noticed Kathy earlier was saying that she could hear, but the sound was low. So if any of you have that problem, I do suggest that you just change the volume on your speakers or whatever you're using, because that's something we can't really control any further. Okay, so in terms of the topic, I sat back after working for, close to 50 years. I sat back one day and said, what is it that makes a project successful? What is it that differentiates why some people are successful and others are not? And I came to the conclusion that there are, in fact, 5 very critical success factors. And in fact, this whole topic is covered in one of my webinars, so I'll just sum it up here for you. The first one I think that's very important is to focus on the goals. You've got to maintain a relentless focus on your goals and objectives of your project, because only through doing that are you really going to accomplish them. One, of course, is processes, and we're all familiar with processes. I know that most of you are PMPs, most of you are very experienced, and processes are important. The third area, and we're getting from very hard and tangible things into a soft area now, and these are the skills. These are the skills that you and your team bring to the project, and of course there's the technical skills, the management skills, and more important for everyone on the team is to have a fair knowledge of the business and the business skills. The area I think that's extremely important is to have a very good attitude. You should maintain a strong vision, be motivated, be passionate, be positive, and have a proactive attitude on your project. And with that, as a leader on your project, you're going to encourage your team to have, again, the same kind of attitude. Area, which is something that I don't think a lot of people really pay much attention to. It's a bit like a fish swimming in water. You tend not to think of the water around you, but the culture that exists in the organization is extremely important. You look around and you see some very successful companies, and you can attribute that to the very strong culture that's in existence in those organizations. So it's very important to understand and leverage or adapt the culture of your organization, and even within your organization of your department. So you need to understand it, you need to leverage it where it's good, and you need to sort of mitigate against it where you think there are things in the culture that are preventing your project and your team and yourself from being successful. With goals. So I've got 20 best practices, and I've kind of scattered these out throughout these 5 areas, so that you'll get a sense of what's important in each area. So starting with goals, as I said earlier, you're passionate about and focused on the business goals of your project. So make sure that throughout everything you do, every presentation you make, that you maintain a team focus on achieving the business goals and objectives of the project, not the project technologies. Now, you have to obviously be successful in introducing and implementing technologies, but make sure that the focus of your project is using those to help your project succeed from a business perspective. Goals have to be SMART. You've probably all heard of this before, where SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. And the project goals and objectives should be visible in all key communications. When I was the CIO in Revenue Canada, I made sure every presentation I made as CIO included some reference. In fact, there was one slide that I used, Vision of the Future. It showed the strategic direction of the organization, and people could see that every single thing they did in some way was helping us to achieve that strategic objective. So every time you have a presentation or communication of any sort, make sure that you have some visibility as to what the project goals and objectives are. You can see the slide on the left, and that is no longer on the internet, but this in fact was I did a Google on dashboards, and I came with a Google dashboard, which they've now taken off. But you can see from there, in the top left, you can see project objectives. You may not be able to read them, it doesn't really matter. The point is that on their dashboard, they've made sure that they made it very clear as to what this project's trying to do, not just what the status is, but here, let's reiterate, these are what we're trying to accomplish. So I thought that was a great thing to do, and just an example of embedding goals and objectives into a key document. And you need to be a business partner to your clients. You need to help them understand and harness the application of new technologies to achieve business transformation. Now, in this day and age, I'd have to say that most business partners are as adept as to the new technologies, the mobile, the internet, whatever it might be, as some of the people within the IT shop. So that's something to at least recognize and work together to understand how can you leverage these technologies. From a client perspective, it's quite often easy to say, well, I want mobile, I want this, I want that, without recognizing the security, the privacy, all the other risks that are endemic to introducing new technologies. So you have to work together to make people understand, but also be open to ideas and opportunities that they may come up with. I'm fairly fast, but if as we go through you do have questions, do pop them in the box, and I'll try and answer them as we go along as well. And we will have time for some questions at the end as well. Is to follow a sound, scalable, and adaptable methodology. So now we're in the area of processes, and I'm not going to belabor it because I think you all know how important processes are. I usually apply them, but part of the challenge is, and I've been in organizations where we started off with no methodology, no processes, and within a year or two, we were almost overloaded with processes. So the challenge in this area is not to have processes. The challenge is to have processes that are scalable, adaptable, and allow people to use them very efficiently and effectively without a lot of burdensome paperwork and bureaucracy. So that is the challenge. Number one in process is to make sure you gather requirements well. Now, I've put a little screenshot here of something from Dr. Ralph Young's site. He's a guru on requirements, so if you're interested in this area, I suggest you just do a Google on Ralph Young and requirements, and you'll come up with his site, and he's got a tremendous amount of information and materials and documents, and he's sharing a lot of his knowledge there. So I think you might find that interesting. So you have to work with your client to keep project scope for the initial phase of your requirement to an absolute minimum. There's a great tendency at the beginning to try and put everything into the project because there's a fear on the part of the client that if they don't do that after this phase is done, that's all they'll ever get. So you have to try and create a culture where you and the organization recognize that it's very important to start small, make sure you get everything working correctly, and then build on a strong foundation. So try and discourage the concept of trying to overload your project with requirements, particularly if you read the first requirement secret that Dr. Ralph Young has noted. He has said from his experience, and he's got a tremendous amount of experience in this area, half of the features provided in most delivered software is never used even once. So that's a scary sort of finding, and I think it's true because you look at even software that's delivered, things like Excel and some of the other software. There's all sorts of functionality that people don't even know is in there, and not that someone somewhere doesn't need it, but sometimes it's just put in there because the developers feel this is a nice thing to throw in. So you really have to focus on making sure that the requirements are the minimum possible for the maximum benefit. And a variety of techniques. Again, Dr. Ralph Young on his site has got good little write-ups on all of these things like interviews, brainstorming, requirements, workshops, prototyping, use cases, storyboards. They all have a different value, and for different types of projects, each one of these has a particular value. So understand them, be willing to experiment with them, and I think rather than just doing the same thing every time, which I think is typically a workshop or an interview, experiment with some of these other techniques, and I think it will open up your eyes to ways of improving the way you collect requirements.